Hello and welcome to another episode of Garden to Table with Rose, and I'm back in the kitchen today. It's the beginning of October, the beginning of fall, and I don't really have a lot of things outside in the garden to do at this point. I'm kind of on a holding pattern. I'm waiting for fall bulbs so that I can plant those so that they come up next spring. I'm growing some winter crops, some leafy greens and Brussels sprouts and things like that, and they're doing fine. They're still pretty small, but they're doing okay. So there's not really a lot to do other than clean up. I've pulled out, most of the summer stuff, and just trying to get things organized and starting to put away a lot of the summer yard decorations and ornaments that I usually put out. So nothing worth filming, so I don't have a garden video for you this week, but I do have a cooking video. So what better way to start off the fall than with apples, cider, those donuts that go with the apples and the cider, pumpkin spice. So today I decided I was going to make an apple pie. Apple pie. Now, many of you, I'm sure, already know how to make apple pie, already know how to make fruit pies. It's generally the same formula, but I'm going to add a little twist to it today, and I am going to make an apple pie with a cheddar cheese crust. Now, I am one of those people who likes cheddar cheese on their apple pie. It's something I discovered late in life, several years ago. I'd never heard of it, and into my adulthood, I think somebody mentioned it or said that they liked it, and I said, that's an odd combination. I would never think of savory, like cheese, with a fruit pie. But then I tried it, and it is fantastic. I don't know what to say about it. You have to use sharp cheddar, but it adds something to it. So it's always a tasty variation on the same old apple pie. Now for me, I don't cook pies very often because I don't eat a lot of sweets in general, a lot of desserts. And I am the only one in my house that likes pie, any kind of pie. So if I make a pie, then I'm left with a whole pie, which I cannot possibly eat. I do like fruit pies, so occasionally I'll make them and usually freeze half of it or something and then take it out and reheat it down the road. But even still, if I do that, I don't eat a whole pie. So ends up a lot of it goes to waste. Now I guess you could make mini pies, little tarts and all this tiny stuff, but to me that's a lot of effort, a lot more effort than just making your traditional 9-inch, 8-inch, 10-inch pie. So that's what I'm making today. Now, I have made apple pie with cheddar crust a couple of times over the past 20 years. Like I said, I don't cook pies that often, but I really do like it. This recipe that I'm using today is not the recipe I've used in the past. I'm not even sure which recipe I used in the past, but I just went online and searched for an apple pie with cheddar crust recipe, and I found one on Food Network. So it's on Food Network, and I will try to put the link in the description box, but this is apple pie with cheddar cheese crust from the Farmhouse Rules show, which I've never seen, but that's the show that they took this recipe from. So let me go over the things you're going to need. When you make a pie, you need to make your crust well in advance for the most part, because you want to usually chill it after you mix it up. Now you could use obviously frozen crust, store-bought refrigerated crust, which is actually usually what I use most of the time. It's a lot of work to make pie crust from scratch in terms of the mixing and scraping and rolling and all that good stuff. So I don't do that a lot, even though I could, but I just don't. So I usually will buy them frozen or in the rolls and keep those on hand in my freezer, so that when the mood strikes me for a pie or a quiche or something that requires a pie shell, that I'll have those on hand. But I'm actually going to make this crust today, and when you make a crust, usually it needs to chill. So I'm going to mix this up in my food processor, which I've also never done. Usually when I make a pie crust, I actually do it by hand you know, the mixing and all of that. So this recipe called for use of the food processor, so I said why not try it out. My food processor came with a dough blade that I've never probably used in all the years that I've had it, but I put the dough blade in there, and then I've already grated up my cheese, so you see remnants of the cheese in there. I'm not going to wash that out since I'm putting cheese in the dough. But basically you're going to need some kind of sharp white cheddar cheese, grated up. And they, I think, want you to use 4 ounces. I use 6 because I like the cheese taste to be pronounced. That's the whole point of me making this crust, is so that I can taste the cheddar cheese. So I'm using 6 ounces. They want you to use, I believe, a cup of butter, unsalted. If you don't have unsalted, you don't have to run out and buy it. I mean, just use salted. But if there is additional salt in the recipe, which there usually will be for the pie crust, a little bit of salt, leave that out if you're using salted butter. So since I'm using more cheese, I'm using 6 ounces instead of 4 ounces of cheese. I'm gonna cut the butter back a little bit just because I don't want it greasy. There's a lot of oil in cheese, as we all know. So I don't want a greasy crust. So I'm just gonna use 1 stick, which is 4 ounces, and then maybe a couple of tablespoons out of this partial stick I have. So you're gonna need some cold water, which I have here, and that's just to add to the dough to you know, make it pliable enough for you to work with it. You'll probably need, you know, measuring cups, measuring spoons. I like this handy dandy little dough scraper that is nice if you have a solid surface like your countertop, or in this case I'm using this little island, but that's where I'm going to be rolling my dough. So this is helpful for just kind of getting under there. Stuff gets stuck, you know, even though you flour it, you still get a little sticking sometimes if the dough is too wet. So these come in handy, and they come in handy with other things too. When I chop vegetables, oftentimes I'll use this to scoop it up to transfer it to either my bowl or my pan, whatever I'm doing. It's always good if you're cooking often or baking to have some kind of food scale. So I have my handy dandy little, you know, electronic food scale here. I like this one. I just got this one recently. This one came with its own little bowl. And when you put this bowl on there, the scale tars itself. Tars, I guess that would be the word, past tense. So it does the tar function, so it takes away the weight of the bowl, basically. This is real handy because it depends on what you're doing, but a lot of baking will call for weights of ingredients as opposed to cups and that kind of thing. Weight is more precise, so this comes in handy for that. And also this bowl I really like because then I don't have to try to find my own container, tar it out, you know, then add my dry ingredient and that kind of thing. I can just put it in here and take this off and dump it in my bowl, and this stores right on top of the base, which is cool. So you might need a little spatula, maybe a butter knife, not necessarily. You could always use your scraper to cut if you need to. My cheese, I grated it myself. I would recommend you grate your own cheese. Usually that's the best course, because when you buy cheese that's already grated, they usually coat it in something that keeps it from sticking together. So some kind of powder, and depending on the cheese manufacturer, I guess that varies, but you know, it's not a big issue, but it can cause some thickening of things sometimes that you don't necessarily want, because it's kind of an anti-caking, and it kind of has a thickening function, I think. So they want you to use sharp white cheddar. You could use yellow. You could use any kind you want. You don't have to use sharp. You could use medium. You could use regular, extra sharp. It's up to you. I use this Cracker Barrel just because it's what I grabbed from the grocery store. No particular reason. But you want white, sharp cheddar for this particular recipe. But like I said, you can substitute yellow or whatever you have or whatever you want to use for that. So, and then there's a dash of salt, I believe, in the crust, and I have my salt here. And then let me quickly go over the other ingredients. Oh, and of course you'll need flour. So I always buy unbleached all-purpose flour. I never, ever, ever buy self-rising flour. That's not something that's very helpful for baking, or if you cook a lot of different types of food, because it already has leavening and all this stuff in there, and you don't necessarily need that in a lot of recipes. You don't need baking soda or baking powder or whatever else they add in it. So it's best to just get all-purpose, and then if you need a leavening agent, add it yourself. I get unbleached simply because I don't see the point in going through an extra factory process to bleach the flour. So to me, that probably involves some kind of chemical to bleach it, I'm assuming. And the fewer chemicals I have to deal with, the better. So I just get unbleached. I mean, I guess I can't even really tell a difference when I cook with bleach versus unbleached. Maybe the bleach gives you a little bit of a lighter color or tint. I haven't noticed any difference. I just always buy unbleached all-purpose flour, and I use that pretty much for everything. Even if it calls for bread flour, I'll usually use the all-purpose unless I just happen to have bread flour. The only time I don't use all-purpose is when it calls for pastry flour. Then I actually will buy pastry flour, because it's milled differently. It's like light and fluffy. It's a different texture and everything. So that's the only time I buy a separate one. Okay, so that's for the crust. And then for your filling, or for the rest of the pie, you'll need 1 egg, and this is just to make an egg wash. So you're gonna add probably a tablespoon of water to this and whip and beat it up a little bit, and that's to brush on your crust before you bake it. And it does, well, actually egg wash can do 2 things. It can help hold pieces together. So like this is a 2-crust pie, so you have top crust and then the edges where you seal it together. You could use this to hold them together like a glue, but it also adds a browning factor and a sheen to the top of baked goods and pastries. So I assume they want us to brush this on top before we bake it to make it all shiny and pretty. And I have never made this recipe before, by the way, as you know. That's my MO. Something I have not done and don't even know if it's going to be good, but I will let you know the truth. So for the rest of your pie, you're going to need some cinnamon. I got some Ceylon cinnamon, which is a really good one. A lot better than that like dollar store stuff, or most of the stuff on store shelves. It's really more flavorful. And then I just got some nutmeg from the grocery store. I got some vanilla. I don't think the original recipe calls for vanilla, but I like to add vanilla flavoring to almost everything that I bake, no matter what the flavor is ultimately supposed to be. I just think it adds a depth to flavor whenever there's a touch of vanilla. You're gonna need some brown sugar. I happen to have light brown sugar. You can buy it, you can make it. Most times these days I make my own brown sugar because I don't bake that often and I don't use it that often. So to make brown sugar, you just take white sugar, and I will put it in my mixer bowl with the paddle attachment. You probably could do it in a food processor too. I've never tried that, but you just add a little bit of molasses. Whatever kind of molasses you happen to have on hand. You just start with a tablespoon to, I'd say 2 cups of white sugar. Mix it up, and basically you're gonna just add enough molasses till it gets to the color of brown that you want it, the depth of brown. So this is a light brown. I usually prefer a darker brown sugar, but this one might have actually been store-bought, and they might not have had dark brown at the time I was at the store. But you know, you mix it up until basically it's a brown that you want for your brown sugar. Put it in an airtight container, you're good to go. It probably saves you money than buying separate brown sugar. Then you're gonna need apples. Now this recipe is calling for a mixture of apples, which I think is a great idea. You know, when I first started making pies, I think I just would use one type of apple, usually a Granny Smith, because you want a tart apple for an apple pie usually. So, but as I've grown in my cooking skills, I found that a mixture of the tart and then a lesser amount of a sweet apple, one that doesn't get mushy. You know, you need one that's good for actually pie making. That the two together really complement each other. So it's calling for 2 pounds of Granny Smith apples and 1.5 pounds of Braeburn. And I do not have Braeburn. I actually have Honeycrisp because that happens to be what I have on hand. But basically you could use any sweet apple that's suitable for pie baking. Gala probably would be good. I can't think of any others because I'm not that well versed on apples. But usually when you go to the grocery store, on the signs that describe each produce or fruit, they usually have at the bottom, at least at my grocery store, they'll have a sentence about what that kind of apple is best used for, so you can use that. Or you can go on the internet and search. Jonagold, I think, is another good one that's good for making apple pie, I think. But anyway, you can go online and search for that as well. But I have these Honey Crisps, and they're huge. This thing is like as big as my hand. It's pretty big. Each one of these is, I weighed them, and each one is about 13 ounces. So this apple is almost 1 pound, just this one apple. They are humongous. So I got 2 of those, and then I have 4 of the Granny Smiths, which are a bit smaller. So these 4 together were a little bit over the 2 pounds, but I figured by the time I peel them and core them, you know, it'll work out. You want to peel, core your apples, and slice them into about 1/4 inch slices. Now, if you have a gadget, you could use that. I mean, I have gadgets for my KitchenAids. I have standalone little manual peelers and corers and apple slicers and all that stuff, and I actually rarely use those unless I were doing a lot of apples. And I used to, because I used to when I had small kids living at home, I used to make a lot of applesauce and stuff like that from scratch and can it. So I would be doing big batches of apples, but now I hardly, like I said, I hardly ever make pies. I hardly ever make desserts really anymore. So I'm just gonna use my handy dandy little hand peeler, and then I'm gonna use a knife and cut these up. And that sugar, you're gonna need sugar. I showed you the brown sugar. The recipe calls for brown and white sugar. I'm going to use all brown sugar because I like desserts sweetened with brown sugar. I mean, I grew up eating a southern type diet, and I'm used to desserts having that molasses, that deep rich brown sugar kind of taste to it. So for me, usually when it comes to something like a pie, I'm going to replace half or all of the sugar with brown sugar. But you could use, as the recipe says, it uses more white sugar than brown. You could use half and half. You could use all white if you want it. You could use a sugar substitute. I mean, I think coconut sugar would be really good in this because it does have a brown color tint to it, and it does have that richer taste. But you could use artificial sweeteners. You just got to be careful. I think a lot of times when you use the artificial sweeteners, they don't give the same thickening that sugar does. You know, sugar kind of creates like a syrup. It gets, you know, a little thicker. I can't think of the technical name for that. But I don't know that the artificial sweeteners would do that. So you might need to then add a tablespoon of cornstarch or flour or arrowroot powder or whatever to thicken it. That's another issue too. A lot of fruit pies release a lot of juice. Now, apples isn't one of those, but something, for example, like blueberries, which I love blueberries, and so I probably make more blueberry pies than I make apple pies. But they release a lot of liquid. Actually, most of the berries do. And so most recipes won't really have you put a thickening agent in with your fruit. Some will have you put a tablespoon of flour or something, which for me is not enough when it comes to something that releases a lot of juice, a lot of liquid, like blueberries. I don't want soupy pie. I like my filling to kind of hold the shape of the pie, you know, of the slice of pie, not to just kind of fall apart on the plate. So I tend to add a little more thickener than others. You don't usually need that for apple pie. Apples aren't, you know, they don't have that much, I think, liquid in them. You're gonna need some kind of pie plate. I happen to have a ceramic one here. You'll need at least a 9-inch. This is a 9-inch deep dish. You probably want a deep dish one as well. So that is all we need for the ingredients. First thing we're gonna do is make our crust. I like to refrigerate mine during the rest period. This recipe does not call for refrigeration. It just says let it rest for 30 minutes before you attempt to roll it out to make your pie. To me, it's a lot easier to roll dough when it's pretty cold, because you don't want it to, if the butter and stuff starts melting, it's just going to be wetter, and then it's going to be more likely to stick to your surface. It's going to be harder to pick it up and move it around and do what you need to do. So I would say chill it for at least 30 minutes. You could make the crust the night before. You can make it probably up to 3 days. I don't think I would use it after 3 days unless you had frozen it, but probably up to 3 days in advance you could make it, wrap it in plastic, and then put it in your refrigerator and just pull it out, you know, when you start to get your other ingredients together. And you know, you probably want to let it sit out. If it's really chilled, you know, you need it to be a little bit pliable. So I would just probably let it sit out on my counter for, you know, about 10 minutes before I started rolling. And you're also going to need obviously a rolling pin to roll this dough out. So this is a 2 crust pie. You're going to make 2 crusts out of this mixture. So separate the dough in half after you make it, and then put each in a kind of a disc, pat it down, wrap it in plastic wrap, put it in your fridge for the 30 minutes or overnight or however long you want to refrigerate it. You could take that top crust and do decorative things with it. This recipe just calls for you to put it on top like a traditional old pie and put the 4 little slits in the center to let the steam escape. But you could easily cut it into strips and do a basket weave kind of thing. You could use a cookie cutter and cut it into different shapes and do a design on top. You really, you know, the sky's the limit in terms of what you can do to decorate pie. I've seen braids of dough. You could actually cut it into thin strips and then braid it together and use that to decorate the top in a variety of ways. I'm not doing anything that fancy. I'm not sure. I probably will do strips because I'll probably do some kind of basket weave. I just tend to like that look better on an apple pie in particular. So I may do that, but we'll see once it's chilled. All right, in the crust. So in your food processor, now if you don't have a food processor, you probably could do this in a blender. You just have to use a pulse function. Or you can do it probably in your mixer. You can do it by hand. So there's a lot of ways to do this. I'm doing it with a food processor just because that's what the recipe called for. I don't usually make dough in the food processor. So before we get started with the dough, if you haven't already, click like on the video, subscribe to the channel. There should be a little orange box that if you click on it, it will subscribe you to the channel so you'll get alerts of new videos. So I got my dough blade in here, and then we're going to add the flour and the sugar to this and mix those together, and the salt. There's a 1/4 teaspoon of salt in this recipe, so if you're using unsalted butter, I would recommend you use the salt. You're going to need 2 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour plus more for dusting, as in when you roll it out. You're going to need a teaspoon of sugar in the pie crust, a 1/4 teaspoon of kosher salt, 1 cup cold unsalted butter cut into 1/2 inch pieces, and 1 cup of or 4 ounces of grated extra sharp white cheddar cheese. So in this bowl, I'm going to combine the flour, the sugar, and the salt. And actually, I'm probably going to leave the salt out because I'm using extra cheese. Cheese is salty. Yeah, so I'm going to leave the salt out of mine. Okay, so 2 1/2 cups all-purpose flour. And when you measure flour, which most of you should know, now a lot of people might sift it beforehand. You could do that if you want. It makes it lighter, and you know, it should then create a little bit of a lighter end product. But I don't do all of that unless I'm baking something serious, like some kind of pastry or something, like you know, like eclairs or something like that, where it's there's a need to be very precise. But you do want to at least scrape the, you know, over. want to really mix it together. That was the only purpose of pulsing that. And then with your butter, you want it cold. Mine isn't as cold as it could be because it's been sitting out for a few minutes, but that's okay because I'm gonna chill it again anyway. But basically cut it into small pieces and then just drop it in there. Now this recipe calls for 2 sticks of butter. That's a lot of butter in one pie. And with the cheese, I don't think I'm going to use two sticks. Actually, I think I'm just gonna cut it back to 1. That's just me though. I always tweak these to my liking. I don't like things greasy or super sweet. So a lot of times I will change the amounts based upon what I like. And then this, you know what? I'm gonna save this. I'm gonna tell you, this is a little shortcut. This has some butter still on it, most likely, unless your butter was super cold. It's gonna have something on there. I'm going to use this sheet of parchment paper with the butter on it to grease my pan, my pie plate. So I'm gonna just rub that, literally rub it around in the inside and make sure you get the edge part. And that's how I'm gonna grease it, so might as well make use of it. I'm only doing 1 stick of butter. So we're gonna pulse this until it's kind of crumbly, and then we're gonna add the cheese and pulse that until it's crumbly, and then we're gonna turn it out on our work surface, okay? Move this out of the way. Now it seems to me that there's a need with the food processor to like open it up and kind of push the flour down, which again, I don't know that this is easier than but I am following the recipe. But yeah, I keep finding that it's pushing it, you know, it's pushing the mixture up against the sides of the bowl, so it's not touching the blades. So you kind of got to stop and keep pushing it down. All right, that's all I'm going to do with that, because you don't want to overwork the dough for something like this. You want it to stay flaky, kind of, tender. And so the more you mix flour, usually the tougher your product gets, whatever you're making gets. So add your cheese. I'm doing 6 ounces. The recipe calls for 4 ounces. Make sure it's shredded beforehand. You could even freeze it after you shred it. That would keep it cold. Because again, when you're making pie crust, you kind of want the ingredients to stay as cold as possible until you're ready to cook it. So having your cheese frozen or semi-frozen would be a good idea. All right, so I'm just gonna pulse. It seems very dry. I know after we turn it out, we're gonna add water to it, but it's very dry, very crumbly. I think I'm gonna leave it at that. I think the rest of the mixing takes place by hand. Again, makes me wonder why we use the food processor at all. All right, so my assumption is we're gonna take this off. Let me move this out of the way, so I don't need that right now. All right, let me move all of my stuff over here. Move this out of the way. That out of the way. All right, so I'm just gonna pour this out here and try to get it in a mound, like a mountain. A mountain. And now this is where your little scraper comes in handy. So what I'm gonna do, and this is just me, the recipe doesn't say this, but this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to make like a little heel, and then I'm going to make a little well in the center, and that is where I'm going to place my flour. There we go. I mean my water, my ice water or cold water. Let's see. So Okay, turn the mixture out of the bowl, drizzle in 6 tablespoons of cold water and mix with a rubber spatula until the flour is moistened. Add another tablespoon of water only if needed. Divide the dough in half, shape each half into a ball and flatten into a disc. Rest the dough to relax the gluten, 30 minutes. Okay, I think I can figure that out. So, and I'm using my immaculately clean hands. I think it's a good thing to use one's hands when cooking. It's just nice to the tactile. I'm a person who likes tactile things, so I like the feel of the dough in my hands. So I'm just kind of trying to get the water incorporated a bit without mixing it too much until this mass sticks together like a, you know, like a dough, like you think a pie dough would stick together. So you have to be careful because you don't want to put too much water, because if it's too wet, then you got to start adding flour. The next thing you know, you've overworked it and all that good stuff. Still pretty crumbly. So I'm just kind of squeezing it together a little bit to distribute the water. Like I said, the goal is to get this to stick together but not be soupy. You know, you want to be able to ultimately roll it out and it stay in one piece so you can pick it up and put it in your pie plate and have a nice flaky crust. The more you work it, usually, the tougher the dough gets and the less flaky of a result you'll have. So I don't think I'm going to add any more water than that. Let's see, I probably added about a quarter of a cup, I would say, to mine. But then, you know, I put less butter, so I probably need to add extra to compensate for that, and a little bit more cheese, which added some moisture, I would think. But, you know, you can't really gauge it by mine because I changed it up a little bit. So if you have any that sticks, use your little scraper and scrape it up so you can incorporate that into your mixture as well. This is something that's good if you got kids, smaller kids who like getting their hands in stuff. Letting them knead the dough. Of course, you might end up with a tougher dough if you're letting kids play around with it, but that's okay. Sometimes the experience is more important, right? All right, so I'm not gonna overmix it. I'm gonna make 2 balls, and I'm gonna make mine probably equal. You could make the bottom one have a little bit more, and you could even weigh these. I'm not going to go that far, even though I have my scale here, but you could weigh them to make sure they're exactly equal. You can make the bottom one have a little bit more dough, so because that one you're going to roll bigger, obviously, because that one's covering the bottom and the sides of your pie plate. So that one's going to be bigger, so you may want more dough on that one. I'm going to just keep mine equal because I am doing these strips, so I'm going to waste a little bit of dough probably with that process. But so basically, just getting all my little bits and making sure they're in there. So as you can see, this is a nice disc that's sticking together nicely. It looks like it could be a flaky, wonderful thing. I'm going to press it out a little bit, and I'm going to do the same thing with this one. And then I'm going to take these 2 and wrap them in plastic wrap. And I'm just making a flat disc. You know, then you're going to wrap this like such. Okay, so I have rolled out my dough into 2 little discs and wrapped them in plastic wrap. And now I'm going to take these two and put them in the refrigerator for approximately 30 minutes. You could leave them in there, like I said, probably up to 3 days and they would be fine to use. But I want to eat this pie tonight. So 30 minutes, and then once they're cool, I will be back to roll them out and fill them. In the meantime, while you're waiting that 30 minutes, you could slice up your apples and get your other ingredients ready. I'm going to peel and slice my apples and have those ready to go. And so I'll see you soon. All right, I am back and I have chilled my dough. I have cut up my apples into 1/4 inch thick slices, and I will tell you, you have to use your own intuition to a certain extent when you are cooking. If something doesn't look right to you, or it looks like it needs more or less of something, then you are you're the creator, so you are able to change that. As I was peeling and slicing up these apples, it seemed to me that it was going to be a big volume of apples, more than I needed for one pie. I mean, I'm making one 9-inch deep dish pie, so you only need so many apples. So I ended up using only 3 of the 4 of the Granny Smith, and I only used 1 of the 2 big 13-ounce Honey Crisp. So to me, that looks like a pretty good volume. More of the tart apples to the sweet, and that's what I'm going to go with. I don't even know if I'll use all of this, but that's what I have. Another little trick is that I usually keep this fruit fresh stuff, which you'll find in the canning aisle, or citric acid. Actually, usually I keep both on hand. This is basically citric acid with some kind of silicone powder or something added to it to keep it from caking up. But basically what this does is keep your fruit from turning brown as quickly, and so it's kind of like using lemon juice. Actually, the reason why I buy these things is because I can a lot, and when you're canning fruits and things like that, these things come in handy. Oftentimes, even vegetables, fruit will require you put some kind of lemon juice or citric acid in it, and they're somewhat interchangeable. So you could use lemon juice and toss your apples in a little bit of that and a little bit of water, or you could use citric acid, which I've used this and added a little bit of water to dissolve it, and toss the apples in there just to keep them from turning brown as fast as they normally would. And it didn't take long to peel and slice those apples. They were big apples, and I'm used to peeling and slicing. So now we're going to mix up the filling first, and that's pretty simple usually. So the filling ingredients, again, 2 pounds of Granny Smith apples peeled and sliced into 1/4 inch wedges, and I think I used probably 1.5 pounds, 1.5 pounds of Braeburn or other sweet type apple peeled and sliced into 1/4 inch wedges. I think I used about 13 ounces, almost 1 pound of a sweet apple. It says 1/2 cup granulated sugar, which is white sugar, 1/4 cup all-purpose flour, 1/4 cup packed light brown sugar, 1/2 teaspoon ground cinnamon, 1/4 teaspoon freshly grated nutmeg, 2 tablespoons butter sliced into pats, and it doesn't say unsalted, so I assume you can use salted for that. They don't really care. This is just something you're going to put on top of the filling after you get it in there. 1 egg beaten with 1 tablespoon of water, which is going to be your egg wash, and then 1 tablespoon of turbinado sugar, which is raw sugar for sprinkling. I will be skipping that step. I do not like the crunchy sugar crystals on my pie crust. I don't like that taste at all. So I'll be skipping that. I'll also be using all brown sugar instead of part white and part brown, so I'll be using 3/4 cups of brown sugar. I will be omitting the 2 tablespoons of butter that you're going to dot the top with, because to me that crust has way more it has enough fat in there to suffice. So I'm going to skip the added butter. Like I said, I don't like things greasy or just really fatty. This is just not good for me. All right, so I think that's it. So we'll just toss the apples with the sugar and the flour and the cinnamon and the nutmeg, and I'm adding a little bit of vanilla just because I like putting vanilla in most desserts, and not much, like 1/2 teaspoon, maybe a teaspoon if you'd like. I'm not measuring any of this. 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg. I'm just kind of eyeballing it as I do. Let's see, half teaspoon of cinnamon. I might add a little more cinnamon because I really do like cinnamon with apples. For me, that's a good combo. And then what am I missing? Flour, a 1/4 cup, and then 3/4 cups of sugar. All right, a 1/4 cup of flour, which is probably going to be to absorb some of those juices so your pie isn't soupy. Nobody wants a soupy pie. 3/4 cups of lightly packed. So I have a 1 cup measure here. I'm gonna gauge it. I'm not gonna pack it. So I don't even know if I'm gonna use all of this. I don't like my stuff super sweet, and it's just me eating this, so I'm okay if it's not, you know, super sweet. I didn't use all of that. So I used about 1/2 cup packed brown sugar. And I mean, it could change the thickness, I imagine, because like I said before, sugar does add a syrupy, thicker viscosity to things, usually when you use real sugar. So you may not get that if you're using an alternative. So you're gonna toss it as much as you can without breaking up the apples too much. I wouldn't worry about it being exact. It's all going inside a pie crust and it's all going to meld together. You know, as much as you can get it mixed without, like I said, breaking up the apples too much. Go for it. I'm not mixing it much. 1, because I don't want to break up the apples, and 2, because my bowl is almost full. So I don't want to have any mishaps. Our apples all mixed up. They're sliced, 1/4 inch thickness. I've added a 1/4 cup of flour, 3/4 cup of sugar, either white, all white. Mix the white and brown or all brown. I used all brown. I 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon, a 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg. I added a little bit of vanilla, a 1/2 teaspoon, and I used all brown sugar. And I am also going to add just a pinch of salt. To me, just a pinch of salt adds something to desserts. It seems like, I don't know, it makes the flavors to me stand out a little bit more. That might just be in my head though, but it seems like it does something. So I like adding just a pinch of salt to most dessert type items. So that's what I did. All right, that's all fixed up. Now I'm gonna roll out my dough. So to roll out dough, it's pretty simple. You want it pretty cold. You put a little sprinkling of flour there. You wanna put a little bit of flour on your rolling pin as well, because you're trying not to get this to stick. And you're trying to get this not to stick, and you're also trying to roll it as quickly as possible to keep it from, you know, getting too hot from your hands. So I got my 2 discs of dough from the refrigerator. They've been chilling for about 30 minutes. So I'll start with this one. Coat it a little bit in your flour and then kind of turn it over. And then, now it says to roll this first one into about a 12-inch circle. How do you know when it's a 12-inch circle? One thing you can do is you can keep a little tape measure in your kitchen that is just for food making. So it could be a fabric one or one of those rigid ones, but you could pull that out and then just measure the diameter. Or there's little gadgets you could use. They have like a silicone type or plastic type bag that you can put the dough in that's exactly the right size, and then just roll it till it fills up the bag. They have cutting boards that have circular measurements on there, so then you can just Roll that out until it fills your measurement. Or you can do like I do. Just eyeball it. And then, you know, you could always just put it in your pan and see if it fits. If it doesn't, take it out, roll it a little bit more. It really depends. If you were making a lot of pies, obviously, if that was something you did often, you'd have this down. You wouldn't need to you wouldn't need to measure anything because you would have it already figured out. So now getting this into the pan can be tricky. Now, I haven't made a pie crust in, goodness, I can't even tell you how long. So who knows how this is gonna go. Let's see. Okay, I haven't made a pie crust and shoot, it's been probably some years since I actually made one from scratch. Oh my. Okay, here we go. All right, that's good enough. I'm not complaining. I mean, it's not the most even, but again, you're gonna feel this is gonna bake, so it doesn't need to be perfect, especially your bottom crust. The top is what's going to be more of a decorative. Now you can overhang it if you want. I don't so much want it overhang because I don't want that thick crust at the edge. I mean, some people like that part, but I'm kind of watchful of carbs. I don't need, you know, a ton of them. And also preheat your oven, you know. Preheat your oven to 425 initially. We're going to start it, I think, a little bit hotter, and then I think it gets reduced after a few minutes. But 425 in your oven. I have a convection oven. You can, well, most convection ovens, I think they have them calibrated where it's still the same measurement. So if your recipe is 350 for a regular oven, your convection oven kind of compensates for that. Some don't. I usually just set mine about 5 degrees lower than whatever the recipe asks. Also too, because I don't want it over browned, whatever I'm baking. So I have mine set to 420, I think. 415, 420 would be good with my stove. It's pretty accurate though. I've used thermometers to measure the actual heat and it's pretty on target, but I still just do like 5 degrees lighter. All right, so I got this extra, which I'm gonna incorporate actually into my top. Waste not, want not, as they say. So, there's my bottom crust. And this crust doesn't get pre-baked. So this is one you're just gonna fill and bake. But there it is. All right, let me set this to the side because this top crust I want to do something a little different with. I want to do strips, which maybe I shouldn't be that adventurous making a brand new recipe. But that is what I'm doing. So I kind of want to make some strips and do a basket weave kind of deal. So what you will need if you're going to do that is some kind of pizza cutter. You could use a knife. Where's my pizza cutter? Oh, I think it's in the other drawer. You could use a knife and cut these strips. You could use that tape measure to measure them to make sure they were all even if that were a big deal for you. All right, my plan was to find my little ravioli roller thing to make like a nice scallop edge, but I'm losing time. I couldn't find it. So instead I'm gonna use my little pizza cutter here. You know, this is one of the pizza cutters you do this with. So I'm gonna use this because I figure it'll at least cut me long strips and they won't be scalloped. They'll just be regular, but that's what I'm gonna use to cut my strips with after I roll it out. So this one I would roll, if you're gonna do some kind of decorative thing, you wanna roll it as big as you roll the other one. You know, you could do 12 inches too, because you're gonna probably need to re-roll the scraps when you're doing shapes and stuff like that. And then if your dough starts sticking to your rolling pin, mine's is a little, add a little flour You can put flour on top of the dough, or you can put flour on the rolling pin. I don't want to add too much flour because I don't want to make the dough dry and tough, you know. So let's see. See, it's gonna have to come off. So, you know, if you're gonna do something like this, I would recommend kind of squaring it off so that all of your slices are, all of your strips are nice and uniform for the time, as much as they can be. So like I said, with this one, it's gonna end up that I'm gonna have to re-roll dough, which ultimately might make it a little tougher. But I wanted something decorative. You could just do it plain. Like I said, put the whole thing on there and then just cut some slits in the top for steam to escape. Okay, so I'm doing about 1-inch strips, and I'm guesstimating. You could do them as wide or as narrow as you want them. Also, I think irregular, when you're cooking at home, like this kind of rustic, I think of apple pie as something, you know, very American, very basic, very rustic. You don't necessarily want that to look picture perfect. You kind of like the irregularities, at least I do, when you're a home cook, because that makes it look home cooked. Like, you know, store-bought and professionally prepared things are perfect. Like, it's just, it looks perfect. And so that's nice, but at the same time, you know, when you're a home cook, sometimes it's nice to have that imperfection because it reminds you that it's homemade, and it just seems more authentic than something that's cookie cutter, right? So, and again, you can squeeze these pieces together and piece them together. You can break these strips. Obviously, we're gonna have to because, you know, there are some that we need to be shorter than others. So I'm gonna start with this. If I need more, I will roll more. Just trying to move them to make sure they don't stick. And this is a stone, so it's nice for stuff like this. This, you know, stuff doesn't stick as much. All right, granite. Put your apples in there. Fill it up. They should be, you know, filling it up completely, overfilling it a little. Like I said, I didn't use all the apples, which is fine, because again, I did, as I said, it's just me eating this pie. There's no way I'm gonna eat this whole pie. So either the dogs will be sharing it with me, but they don't like fruit, so I'm not sure they'll want it. I might try to freeze some of it. I don't know. Take it out and reheat it. But yeah, no way am I gonna eat a whole apple pie, or a whole any pie for that matter. All right, so I got my apples nicely in my crust. Now I'm gonna start with my design, and there's no rhyme or reason to how I do this. Now, I haven't done this in a long time. I haven't done this in a long time. I would start at the, kind of towards the center with your long pieces. And I'm gonna just crisscross it as I'm going. This just seems, I don't know, seems like this might be easier. Crisscrossing it as I go. I could be wrong. We'll see. And I'm okay with not having a ton of crust because, you know, as I told you all, I'm part of the low carb crew I try to keep my carbs pretty low, or at least under 100 grams a day, which to me is low compared to the average American diet. So I don't need as much crust as others. What am I doing here? As others might. So you gotta, you know, as you're going, you gotta weave it in, you know, make it look like a basket weave, under and up, that kind of thing. So that's what I'm trying to do here. Under, over, under, that kind of thing. Over, under, over. What did I do here? Okay. Mine aren't all the way they should be, but that's okay. Put that one under, over, under, over. Let me come over here. So get this on this other camera. Okay, where am I? I am going to actually, let's see, I'm getting close to the end, so I'm trying to figure out how I want to do the last of it. Over. See if I can do something more decorative here. Okay. And then I got a piece here, over, under, over, under. And then I'm going to bend all of these around. And then, you know, you want to kind of try to tuck your top crust up under the edge of the bottom as much as you can. You can brush the edge of your bottom with some of that egg wash if you think that would be helpful. I'm just tucking mine down in this pan. And I did grease my pan with that parchment like I said I would in the last segment. So that'll help it not stick. I'm going to use these last strips and go around the edge just to make it look pretty. Prettier. And I didn't put the butter. Now if you're using that extra 2 tablespoons of butter, you would put that in small bits all over the top of the filling before you put your top crust on. But I am not doing that. So I have these pieces left. I wish I had bought up a fall cookie cutter, because I would then make some type of fall decoration, like a leaf or something. I wonder if I can cut a leaf by hand. I'm not that good, especially with pastries, but I will try. Let's see. Let me roll it out. And as you can see, I'm having to use more effort to roll because it's getting tougher. The more you work it, man, the tougher it's going to get. So you need to be decisive, do what you're gonna do, and do it quickly. This pie doesn't play, doughs don't play around with you. All right, I don't have a cookie cutter, and I am not an artiste, but let's see if I could at least make something that's the shape of a leaf. Because it is fall. And try to put this on top. And I'm doing different sizes. Now mind you, I feel I need to say this again. I have no autistic abilities whatsoever other than cooking and sewing. But in terms of art, yeah, no. So my leaves, who knows, will they look like leaves? I'm hoping so. At least a little bit like leaves. So I'm just cutting them out, freehanding them. And you could get a cookie cutter, that probably would make more sense. but I didn't bring one up. My cookie cutters are stored in the basement, and I'm not going to stop the video to go down there and get one. One, I'm worried about the thing cutting off, getting too hot, like it's prone to do. So I'm just gonna do this myself. Not only that, I'm the only one eating this pie. It's not like I'm making it for guests or anything. It's just me. All right, so that's a nice big leaf. I hate to waste any of this dough because it does have that cheese in there. So I think the extra, I'm just gonna put it in a, I don't know, cut it into a square and bake it like a cracker or something. That's what I'm thinking I'm about to do, because I don't want it to go to waste. Oh, that's cute. That's actually pretty cute. Right, how should I do that one? I don't know. There we go. Let me do one more. One more. One more leaf. One more leaf. So we'll put this one here. Well, I think that's cute. Look at that. All right, so now I'm gonna do something with that. Now you can sprinkle your, actually no, first you want to do your egg wash all over it. I'm gonna use it, it'll help brown it. It'll give it a sheen, hopefully. And then you would, if you're gonna use that raw sugar, then you sprinkle it on there after you brush this on here, okay? Now, I'll tell you the cooking times in a second, but a lot of times with pies, you have to cover the edges at some point. Either you can cover them from the beginning if you have a, you know what, I'm gonna make another strip for that. If you have one of those edge guards, you can cover the whole thing with that. You can use aluminum foil, just crimp it around the edge of the crust, because that will tend to brown faster than the rest, and you don't want it burnt. This I'm rolling out because around this edge, I just want to put a strip so it'll look a little bit better. I'm not impressed with how it's looking. So, and I'm just doing this makeshift kind of thing, and tucking it in. Just think that looks good with that. There's an edge on there. Some kind of definitive border, as they say. Okay, I think that's good. Now, back to my, and obviously you're not going to use all this egg wash. You're going to end up dumping most of it. You use a small egg if you have smalls. All my eggs are large or jumbos. So, actually I think this is a duck egg. So I'm trying to use some of those because they're getting old. So that's actually a duck egg, which is good because it has more fat. All right, so I brushed it with the egg wash. I'm not going to cover the edges of mine because, as you can see, I don't have any overlapping edges. I just kind of tucked mine all in, and like I said, I don't really like a lot of extra dough on the edge because that's just more carbs, so I don't need that. I want to taste more fruit actually than crust for me personally. And now I'm going to put it in the oven, 425 for 25 minutes, and then I'm going to turn it down to 350, and there's another 45 minutes you're supposed to cook it. Watch it throughout that cooking time. If the top starts to look like it's getting too dark for your liking, cover it, put some foil on it or something like that to keep it from getting darker, and so that you can complete cooking for the rest of the time that you need to cook it. Then you're going to cool it. You need to cool it down to close to room temperature, so it's going to take a few hours. I mean, pie filling is hot, in case you didn't know, so it's going to take probably like 3 hours or so. So I'm going to get this going, and then I'm going to start on my dinner for the day, and so hopefully I can have this a taste of this before I go to bed. So I will come back when I take it out of the oven and show you how it's supposed to look. All right. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I'm leaving out. Put this on a cookie sheet, your pan. It just helps because a lot of times pie fillings bubble. You know, they can bubble over and out of your vessel. I mean, mine has pretty tall sides, so it's probably unlikely here, but you know, depending on what kind of pan you're using, it's just easier to put a cookie sheet. Not only do I put a cookie sheet under it, but usually I'll put foil on the cookie sheet because if it boils over, that stuff is sticky, it hardens on there. It's hard to get off. I don't want to have to try to scrub my cookie sheet, so I'll usually put foil there. That way I can just throw the foil away. But yeah, put something under it and you're good to go. All right, I'll be back in an hour or so. All right, I'm back and I just want to show you the pie. I just took it out of the oven. Now, like I said, it has to cool off for several hours, 3 hours approximately. But as you can see, and it's very hot, so to put the oven mitts on. But it's a nice golden brown on top. I don't want to tilt it too much. It still has juice running out. Nice golden brown on top. I cooked it, like I said, at 420, I think it was at first, for 25 minutes, then 350 for another 45 minutes. I had to cover the top after the 25 minutes because it started getting pretty dark pretty quickly. So I covered my top with aluminum foil and it's a nice, beautiful golden brown. There's still a lot of liquid in here, even though I added that 1/4 cup of flour to the apple. So we're hoping that it thickens up as it sits and cools. So that's where we're at with the pie. So like I said, it'll be at least 3 hours. You gotta wait until it gets to be room temperature. One, it'll firm up some. Otherwise, it'll just kind of fall apart if you try to cut it while it's that hot. Plus, its filling gets hot. Pie filling is super, super hot. You'll scold yourself if you try to eat it right away. So that's that, and I will be back with the final taste test. All right, I am back with my pie, and I'm going to do my taste test. It's cooled off for a few hours. I've cut a piece out, as you can see, and it's here on this plate. So you could top this with something if you want, or serve ice cream on the side. I am going to not have ice cream, but I'm going to put a little bit of honey on it. This is the infused honey I made a while ago, but I couldn't eat it because I was doing low carb last month. But this is the infused honey with different spices. I think there was a ton: cardamom, cinnamon, vanilla, some other stuff, probably cloves, who knows. But I want to put a little bit of that on there just because I have not had the opportunity to taste it. So, all right. Now, as I said, I was not putting as much butter as the original recipe called for, so I'm pretty sure if you follow the original recipe, your crust will be a lot flakier than mine. My crust is actually pretty crispy. Even the bottom, I think it was the ceramic pie plate. Yeah, the bottom is nice and crisp, which you don't get a lot on pie. Usually the bottoms are soggy. That's why you gotta try to get rid of some of that liquid by putting some kind of thickener in there so your bottom crust doesn't get too soggy. But this is good. Actually, the cheese is not as pronounced as I would like it. Like, you taste that subtle taste of the sharp cheddar, but I wanted it to be in your face. It tastes like cheddar. So I think if I were to make this again, I would add more cheese. Probably double the amount of the original recipe. And then I cut the butter in half anyway, so I'd stick with that. But it's not very sweet because I didn't put the full amount of sugar in there. I don't like really sweet desserts, so it's just sweet enough, plus the tartness of the Granny Smith apples. It's pretty good. It's probably not something I would make regularly, if I even make it again, because like I said, I don't bake pies a lot, and when I do, usually I don't make crust from scratch. I usually buy store-bought crust. That adds, you know, a couple of hours really if you got to chill it down and all that stuff. So I don't know that I'll be making many more apple pies, but this one is sure enough tasty, and I probably will freeze at least half of this in individual servings so that they can be reheated. So whenever I have an inkling, whenever I have a craving for some apple pie, then I can just pull out a piece and reheat it, because there's no way. It's a whole pie. It's a whole pie. It's good though. Yeah, so that recipe's okay. I would not say it's great. If I had to rate it on a scale from 0 to 5, I'd probably give it a 3.5. You know, like I said, you can't taste a lot of the cheddar cheese, so it just kind of comes across as a plain apple pie, which is good, but that wasn't what I was going for here. So that's why I'd give it a 3.5. All right, so thank you for joining me for another episode of Garden to Table with Rose, and who knows what I'll be cooking next time.